I would like to welcome you to the first session of the NIFS Colloquial Series, jointly organized by the Office for Research with the Young Scientists Association of NIFS. So, thanks to COVID-19, we all are very familiar with using these online platforms like Zoom and Google Meet. So now we have the opportunity to invite speakers from all over the globe. So today we have Dr. Vagisha Gunasekara joining us through Google Meet for the first colloquium. So before I introduce the speaker to you all, I'm going to do it in a different way. So I'm going to first introduce the audience to the speaker because she is not physically present here with us today. And I would also like to welcome those who have joined with us online. I have a little request to keep your mics and the video switched off throughout the talk. You can talk when the talk is open for discussion. So, Dr. Vagisha, let me first introduce you our senior scientists who are seated in the first row, starting with Professor Gamini Senamiratne. He's a professor of microbiology and biotechnology, and Professor Cyril Vijay Sundara, professor of plant taxonomy. And we have Dr. Vanduradala, who is the secretary of the NIFS. And we have Professor Lakshman Disana, professor, senior professor in physics. We have Professor S.A. Kulasurya. Uh, he's the senior scientist of our ISO project. He's a professor in botany. Uh, and we have Professor Kumara, who is also a senior scientist of NIS. We have Dr. Ruini Lienage. She is the research fellow of the nutrition project. And we have Professor Veerasurya, Abraham Veerasurya. And you can see the others. They are the research assistants of NIFS who are reading for their masters and PhDs. Have like MPhil students, master students, and also undergraduate final year students who are conducting their research projects at NIFS. We also have some from the administrative staff. Uh, so now let me introduce you, Professor. Let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Vagisha Gunasekara. Vagisha Gunasekara is a political economist. She is a senior lecturer of politics and international relations in the Department of Social Studies of the Open University, Sri Lanka. She received her PhD in political science from Purdue University, USA. Wagisha takes an interdisciplinary approach in exploring the interaction between global forms and local political economy of emerging contexts and practices of governance and labor. So, she is here today to talk to a bunch of scientists, young and experienced, about knowledge, responsibility, and refashioning our identity. Over to you, Wagisha.
Thank you very much, Shalini. Good afternoon, everyone. Um, I think this is the post-lunch session, so I'm sure all of you will enjoy a great nap at the end of the 30, 40 minutes that I'm going to talk to you. Um, I would like to thank Professor Cyril Vijayasundara and the National Institute of Fundamental Studies for inviting me to speak in the colloquia series. It's really an honor and a great pleasure to be connected with you. Even though I would have loved to make this an excuse to make a trip up to the beautiful hill country to meet you in person, thanks to Google Meet, I guess we're able to do this without me having to drive up to Kandy, emitting greenhouse gases and contributing to air pollution, right? Um, when Professor invited me to speak here today, I went online and checked out the student profile at NIFS. I went to your website and clicked study, and it had a tagline, mentoring future scientists of our nation, our commitment to scientific advancement. So this tagline, in many ways, inspired me to say something about what it means to produce knowledge and science in the context of our education system. An engagement of this topic also, I think, invariably pushes us to think about our responsibility as scientists and citizens to the nation. So I will share some thoughts on these ideas: knowledge, responsibility, and the nation, not necessarily trying to put them into an equation, but trying to encourage you to reflect and think about them. I'm not a scientist, at least not in a conventional sense. My academic training is in the field of political economy, as Shalini mentioned earlier. And an occupational hazard, I would say, of being a political economist is that we don't necessarily think in a linear fashion. Everything is sort of like an assemblage for us, like a constellation, much like the universe. No equations like A plus B equals C. So, what I want to share with you today is an assemblage of ideas for you to think about as students, as scientists, both senior and emerging, as citizens, and very importantly, as Sri Lankans. First, something on knowledge. What we call knowledge is a certain accumulated information. Whether you want to plant a tree, cook your meal, conduct an experiment in the lab, produce a great computer, build a building, whatever it is, this accumulated knowledge is important. What you call a cookbook, an engineering book, or a medical book is simply accumulated knowledge. What has been known and invented long ago, you accumulate that knowledge so that you do not have to reinvent the wheel every day. You do not have to end up like a fool who's doing the same thing over and over again, right? So, is this knowledge useful or not useful? That's a question I want to ask. But before we attempt to answer this question, I think we must think critically about what is being posed as knowledge to us in the modern world. I'll take my own academic discipline as an example. Politics. In our part of the world, has a history that dates back to, say, the first millennium before Christ. The great Indian scholar Kautilya, he's also known as Chanakya. You may know him as the teacher and the guardian to the Emperor Chandragupta Maurya, grandfather of Emperor Ashoka. He wrote the oldest, one of the oldest recorded texts in my field of study. It's called Arthashastra, which loosely translates into the science of politics. It has been found that Arthashastra was compiled and completed about 300 years before Christ, or shall we say, before time begins in the modern world. This science has been in existence for over 2,300 years at least. However, Chanakya's these brilliant theses that he wrote are not to be found in any of our school textbooks, university notes, or in articles and papers in reputed academic journals in the world. What I was taught in university in the US is that politics begins with dead white men. Karl Marx, whom I love and whom I studied extensively as a political economist, wrote his thesis in the 1800s, about 2,100 years after the volumes of Arthashastra was compiled. If you look at school textbooks in Sri Lanka, you will see very similar things, like politics begins with liberal democracy, things like that. So, what happened to this previous knowledge? Whatever happened to the wisdom of Chanakya? Is it not knowledge? I would like to ask the same from you about science. Were you ever taught about the scientific logic in indigenous agriculture or medicine? I'm not sure. I don't think so. Instead, I think you were taught to think that previous knowledge, or anything to do with history for that matter, is primitive, backward, and probably redundant. I spent long years as a student and a researcher traveling different countries for research. And everywhere I went in the colonized world, I noticed a similar pattern about knowledge. what they historically considered knowledge and science was erased and replaced with education. This is the education that you went through, and I'm mainly talking to the students here, and it is the education that I went through. The, the current education system, as you and I know it, was introduced by the colonizers, and in our case, mainly the British. And why was this the case? See, colonization is both an economic project and a political project of domination. Whenever somebody occupies a nation, the first thing they will do is change your name. This is the technology of dominance. It's the technology of enslaving. If you look at African American history, which I studied in the US, when African people were brought to America, the first thing they did was took their African name and gave them some other silly name. This is what has been done to us. I mean, look at South Asian cities. Chennai became Madras, Yalpanam is Jaffna, Senkadagala is Kandy. Like this, India, we became Ceylon. So what does this mean? It actually doesn't mean anything. If I give you a meaningless name, you will become meaningless, stupid person in front of me because I have a meaningful name. I have a tradition. I have a culture, and you have nothing. So in that context, we became Ceylon. So this is where it begins. The second objective is to take over the economy, which is very much the crux of colonial domination. The third thing they do is to change the way you think. So, in other words, reprogram your head. In political science, we call this mental slavery. Education and economics are two fundamental activities that shape our lives, right? And imperial domination has made sweeping changes in both areas. In order to feed industrialization and the global capitalist processes, we came up with an education package that is common for everybody. This mass education system does not recognize individual sensibilities and the uniqueness of every human being. Over time, it has become a mass extruder program where everybody comes out as a product that fits into the larger economic engine, if you will. Because education is driven by standards of the economy, it imparts how to use and exploit nature, markets, ideas, not to be inclusive of the world around us. So this system, over time, and in the context of neoliberal globalization, has created certain pathologies. See, I mean, I started this by saying, Kautilya and his science of politics. And here we are now talking about politics of science or politics of knowledge. So let's talk a little bit more about knowledge, education, and these pathologies that I mentioned that have been created in this day and age. I want to show you a slide. Can everybody see this? Okay. So this is pathology number 1, anthropocentrism. We think, so basically anthropocentrism is that we think we're the center of the universe. It's a philosophy that human beings are the central entities in the world. This basic belief is pretty much embedded in monotheistic religions, if you will, and philosophies that emerge from them. Anthropocentrism regards humans as separate from and superior to nature. This is the view that basically human life has intrinsic value over others like animals, trees, plants, mineral resources, They do not. So it's the belief that there are resources that may be justifiably exploited for the benefit of us, humankind. This forms the fundamental basis of the global economic model, which of course stems from colonial domination and monotheistic religious philosophies. By derivation, our education system comes from this. Sri Lanka is following the same model, and over the past couple of decades, we have seen and felt the effects of climate change and social inequality because our way of thinking and being. But I want to remind you about the various footage from various parts of the world that we saw during the COVID-19 lockdown. There was enough evidence that nature thrives when humans take a break from pillaging it in the name of growth and development. The air quality in most countries in the world improved, and residents of Delhi, if you saw this, they were able to see the Himalayas after 41 years. And in recent weeks, lists have been published all over the world of what we call essential workers. And to our surprise, jobs like hedge fund manager, multinational tax consultant, they appear nowhere in these lists. All of a sudden, it has become very clear who is doing the truly important work in care and in education, in public transport, in grocery stores, so on and so forth. In 2018, two Dutch economists did a study leading them to conclude that a quarter of the population, working population, suspect their job is pointless. Even more interesting is that there are 4 times more socially pointless jobs in the business world than in the public sector. The largest number of these people, according to the study, with self-professed, what we call bullshit jobs, are employed in sectors like finance and marketing. This is what happens, I guess, when we become completely absorbed with ourselves. So there is enough evidence to get us energized in stepping out of this anthropocentric model of living. I think we have an opportunity to make small but defining changes to the way we do business and the way we educate ourselves and the next generations. I think we have an opportunity to take our scientific innovation in a different direction, perhaps. Pathology number 2, I'm going to show you another cartoon. Okay, hypercompetitiveness. So this pathology stems from the need to fit into the economic machine and become successful. We have defined success in a narrow, superficial manner and have cultivated unnecessary competitiveness among students in our education system. As a result, we suffer from toxic emotional states such as extreme selfishness leading to self-centered and harmful behavior. This type of emotional patterns also hinder any prospects of teamwork, which ironically is the requirement in most public and private institutions. And the pressure to perform and win has taken away the students' ability to look at life with freshness and with involvement. So there is a need to replace this hyper-competitiveness based on individual achievement with a different value system where success is defined as working towards one goal for the nation. This is pathology number 3. We are in a psychological and emotional cesspit driven by hyper-competitiveness and probably compounded by other factors outside our experience. We have become psychologically and emotionally unstable nation. Suicide, if you know this, or self-harm, accounts for about 6% of deaths among individuals in the age group of 15 to 29 in this country. The estimated national suicide rate is much, much higher. Extreme anger and other very harmful emotions have turned schools into hostile spaces for some students. A significant proportion of students, about 40% of them in Sri Lanka, has reported being bullied on one or more days in a month at school. In general, about 50% of the boys are likely to report being bullied than girls, who about 30% of them get bullied. So bullying is a common occurrence in an environment that is guided by harmful psychological and emotional states such as anxiety, depression, and feelings of insecurity and also inadequateness. These psychological issues graduate into ragging in universities, which have been taken into violent extremes, and we all know this coming from university backgrounds. These do not stop in school or in university. They continue into life well after that. I'm sure you all know that 1 in every 5 married women in Sri Lanka suffers from domestic violence by their spouse or intimate partner. So these psychological states, compounded by peer pressure, also leads to high rates of drug and other substance abuse by schoolers and university students. What this means is that average student finds it very difficult to cope with pressures to perform inflicted on them by the system, which invariably includes their parents, peers, teachers, and relatives. So as they compete with each other to become successful, the great virtues of, say, compassion, responsibility, they slowly fade away. So the question is, what is the point of producing a labor force and a society that might be intellectually sound, but of very poor mental and psychological health, right? Pathology number 4, another cartoon. So this is a very important one. I think we have become an ahistorical generation, and we are producing ahistorical generations. So ahistorical essentially means removed of history. The race to win a secure position in the economy has produced several generations of individuals for whom history has become irrelevant. Being well informed about histories of people, heritage, technology, creativity, and ancient knowledge systems, it may not reap us profits in the world economy, but it will offer a historical perspective on what and how to innovate according to cultural and social needs of our people. So history must be imparted through the school system, which unfortunately is not the case anymore in Sri Lanka. Sadly, all of you, perhaps not the very senior professors, but most of you have had an ahistorical education. History is limited currently to rote memorization of kings and kingdoms in ancient Sri Lanka. It should not be limited to history of 1 or 2 kinds of people who live and have lived in this country. History should be taught using sources of historiography, archaeology, evolutionary biology, folk tales, and poems. There are histories, plural, of human settlements in Sri Lanka dating back to 125,000 years in this island. The innovations, the technologies, food patterns, foreign relations, trade, spiritual development should all be part of the education. Sri Lanka's indigenous knowledge systems that have produced, world-class innovations in irrigation, construction, and medicine have almost gone extinct, except for, I guess, Paramparika Vidya Shastra. which continues in a diluted form. We, I think, have replaced our indigenous knowledge systems, which have yielded excellent results as far back as, 10,000 years ago, with different logics, perhaps Western logics, and knowledge systems that developed only in the past 500 years. I'm not saying we should reject Western logics or science. The problem lies in the erasure. When we erase one form of knowledge and when the other becomes dominant, especially through colonial and neo-colonial conquests. See, history, I value history a lot because history is what makes an individual a patriotic citizen. While it is important that we enhance individual intellect, the purpose of education should also be to produce somebody who loves his or her country and feel responsible for it. A thorough knowledge of who we are and what we have contributed to the world, it builds confidence in us. It makes us proud, and that way we want to embrace our identity as Sri Lankans. And now I must say something about identity because it has become a very fashionable word these days. I think we must understand that a nation is not some sort of a God-given thing. It's an idea that all of us have agreed to. A nation is instilled in the form of its constitution and its symbolism of the nation. It comes to us in the form of a flag, an anthem, and various other things. So the question is, if you want to operate, live, prosper, and excel as a nation, is it important to have pride and allegiance to this nation? That's the question. I'm not somebody who's talking about nationalism. I'm for humanism. I'm for universality of all of human existence. But right now, the largest segment of population that we can address is a nation. Sri Lanka as a nation is 20 million people, a little bit more maybe. It's a world by itself. If we do not build a strong sense of nationhood, I don't think we can prosper. We cannot contribute to the world's well-being if we don't think like a nation. And we cannot be of any significance, unfortunately, if we don't think of the nation. I want to tell you a little story, a quick story. Recently, a student of mine asked very, very cynically, and student of politics, they're always very cynical. She asked, should I stand up for the national anthem or not? And she really didn't want to. I said, well, if you have no legs, we will pardon you. But even if you have no legs, you must show some sense of respect for the anthem and flag, because these are symbols of nationhood. It is through this that a nation is integrated. If you cannot sing your anthem with pride, where is the question of nationhood? So I went on to tell the class then, the Sri Lankan army, the other wings of the forces, the police, the health services, lakhs and lakhs of people who work in these services are constantly risking their lives every day for us. We all saw this crystal clear during the COVID-19 lockdown. And some of you may have been too young to witness this during the 30-year war as well. So I said, please tell them that you do not care a damn for this nation so that they can go home and live their lives, right? Why are they standing there to protect this nation at the cost of their life if you don't care anything about the nation? This is what I told my class. So it's important that a sense of nationhood is built strongly into the minds and hearts of every young person and every citizen in this country. This is one thing that unfortunately we have failed to do post-independence. This should have been done immediately after independence because a nation exists only in our minds and in our hearts. It's not a material thing, right? Post-independence in Sri Lanka, when there was strong emotion and spirit about the nation, this should have been done. Unfortunately, it did not happen for a lot of political reasons, which I'm sure all of you know about. So as a result, a whole lot of people have identified themselves with their ethnicities, with their religions, castes, creed, sex, and whatever else. But above all, they have started to identify themselves with their own sense of crude individuality. I think we should stop this argument right now if we are concerned about the millions of poor people in this country who are not even properly nourished. And if we want to develop this country, it's important that we bind this nation with a strong emotion of nationhood. Without this, there will be no nation. Because nation is an agreement. It's an agreement that we have all come to. When we say we are for this nation, we have agreed that there are certain things that we value, we respect, and we stand for. Okay. Pathology number 5. I promise there's only a few more. I wanted to say a little bit more about knowledge and intelligence. Being book smart as opposed to intelligent. So the past 2-3 generations of students are excellent at rote memorization, which is required by standardized tests. However, this cognitive pattern has very dangerous outcomes. Intellect is a small part of human intelligence, and only with the memory background, the intellect functions. And I think you know this better than me, probably. Neuroscientists, psychiatrists, and psychologists agree that there are 8 different types of human intelligence that can be harnessed through a well planned education system. There are linguistic, verbal, logical, mathematical, spatial, musical, bodily, or interpersonal, and various forms of sort of naturalistic forms of intelligence too. So being book smart allows students to get ahead in life for sure, but it leaves behind the vast majority of whose potential and forms of intelligence never gets an opportunity. They never get a chance. A manifestation of this pathology, this particular pathology, is the ignorance of students about the world around them. They do not know anything beyond the textbooks. Their knowledge about plants and animals that are endemic to this island is actually virtually non-existent. There are students who do not know how to plant a tree. I'm talking about very young ones. If one does not know, in a deep way about properties and the potentials of hundreds and thousands of flora and fauna in Sri Lanka, how will they ever innovate in areas such as agriculture, botany, biochemistry, and alternative energy? I don't know. These students are oblivious to indigenous farming techniques that work with nature as opposed to methods that work against it. As a result, they're easily swayed by other ideas that give the promise of being more scientific, more efficient, more productive. I think a fitting example in this regard are the young agricultural extension officers that promote the use of inorganic fertilizers, seeds, and other agrochemicals among farmers. So most of these officers are not equipped with the knowledge to counter the dominant narratives of multinational fertilizer companies. I'm not saying that there is right or wrong. They just don't know that another knowledge system exists. So another pathology number 6. This is the pathology I see in our system. The physical body is unused. Today, the non-communicable diseases, NCDs, are increasing at an alarming rate in Sri Lanka. Obesity is the main contributory factor for the development of NCDs, and the obesity epidemic has negated many of the achievements made by the Sri Lanka public health sector in the post-colonial period. Childhood obesity is a major risk factor for the development of adult obesity. Uh, and more than 75% of obese children are found to become obese adults. And in Sri Lanka, childhood obesity ranges between 15 to 25%, depending on the age of the child. This is the 2018 figure that I got. I think this is an alarming trend, and it carries consequences for the quality of the health of the labor force, government spending on non-communicable diseases, and the overall well-being of the people. One of the simplest things about health is just to use the body. If you use the body sufficiently, it has everything to create health for itself. This is except for, physically or developmentally disabled individuals. If our physical bodies are sufficiently used, the rate of disease and ailments could be dramatically reduced. So health is when your body is working well, your mind is working well, your energy is supporting the two, making sure nothing goes wrong. But our education system does not encourage health. Inactivity is built into the design of the system. Students are overburdened with assignments and pressure to pass exams. Students have extraordinarily little time for sports, dance, martial arts, and other activities that use the body. Physical activity is also not given much value in our society. And as a result, a lot of us have become chair potatoes whose physical activity pretty much boils down to sitting and eating. If this trend continues, Sri Lanka will produce citizens with academic qualifications, but not physically healthy enough to realize their full potential. And that's a very sad thing. The last slide I'm going to show you is this. Okay, this is lucky number 7. Now I want to talk about dangers of living unconsciously. This is a very serious pathological condition of children, students, adults, and citizens in general. We go about life without being conscious of ourselves and our surroundings. Increasingly, the attention spans of people are getting shorter, which has posed problems for teaching methods as well. Now I have to break down my lectures into 20-minute segments because they can't pay attention to more than 20 minutes at a stretch. A common pattern observed among students in secondary and tertiary education is that they do not actively listen to others in a conversation or in a discussion in an open-minded manner. They do not observe, and most of the time they speak quite frivolously. And as a result, their skills to observe, investigate, and describe situations, objects, or people are at an exceptionally low level. Another manifestation of this particular pathology is that students find it difficult to directly respond to a question. The absence of basic descriptive skills poses several challenges to developing strong analytical skills, which are of a higher order. In the field of humanities and social science education, an observable chronic pathology in this regard is that students merely just state their opinions without doing groundwork to build a body of evidence to support a position. The broader issue indicated by these behaviors and diminishing skills is the lack of awareness and lack of discipline as individuals. It's important that our future education platform is geared to make students' minds capable of, razor-sharp perception, which can only be achieved by the practice of mindfulness, discipline, and self-restraint. Now, we do not create these pathologies of our own. There's an entire ecosystem of people, ideas, values, and institutions that contribute to the pathological conditions. Parents, teachers, and society in general, the media, are central to this ecosystem. We can actually identify the two main culprits of these issues as education and the media. Now, if we are to foster a next generation whose minds are capable of this razor sharp perception, capable of knowing life in its full depth and dimension, I think we must recalibrate our education. We also must rethink about how we should reorient media, even parental methods, and in general, our perspective of life and our way of life. Again, these are 7 pathologies that are just my mere observations. They're not part of a grand thesis. This is not research. I'm not presenting research to you. I just put these in front of you as some food for thought for you to think about during your free time and think about how you feel about them, just as scientists and citizens in general. Now, I want to conclude by telling you a story that has inspired me to do what I do. And I hope it inspires you too, especially the young scientists out there. This is a story about a man who inspired the world by an act of perseverance, commitment, and also responsibility to the nation and to the world. This is a story of a Sri Lankan athlete. His name is Ranatunga Karunananda. I don't know whether the young ones know about him. He was born in 1936, and as a young child, he showed great ability in athletics. He loved running. Karu, he was called Karu. Karu enlisted in the Sri Lanka Army, but he continued, as you can in the forces, he continued athletic training. And he was the best long distance runner in Sri Lanka at the time, which led him to represent our country in the 1964 Summer Olympics in Tokyo, Japan. This particular Olympic Games was an important event for Japan. Why? Because it was immediately after World War II, and the United States has crushed Japan. The Japanese were trying to rebuild their country. They needed a successful event to draw attention of foreign investors, but above all, to encourage their citizens to build up their morale. So on October 14th of 1964, everything was set for the men's 10,000 meter event, running event. 29 athletes from 17 nations participated in this. Karunananda was one of them. As the starting signal was fired, he started running. There's a YouTube video about this. You can watch it. He started running beside Billy Mills of the United States, who eventually won the event. The event, of course, required completing 25 laps, 400 into 25. And by the end of the first lap, Karunananda was 200 meters behind the rest of the runners, rest of the pack. While the other runners completed the 10th lap, Karunananda was running his 9th. By the end of the 20th lap, Karunananda was the last place runner, but he did not give up. The race ended with Billy Mills from the United States, Mohammed Gamoudi from Tunisia, and Ron Clark from Australia touched the finishing line as gold, silver, and bronze medal winners. Karunananda still persisted, and he's running. He was running in his 21st round, alone on this lap, and around 60,000 spectators were watching him. They started booing him. They booed him really bad. But he kept on running. Even after the other runners finished running, he kept his pace and continued. He could have stopped, but he continued running the last 4 laps alone. He started the 23rd lap, two laps to the finish, and a round of applause was heard from the audience. Now, people who were booing, they were now clapping, followed by a massive cheer. The whole stadium was reverberating with the chant, Karu Silon, Karu Silon. That was the chant. Karunananda ran the last 400 meters of his run. He finished. He did not achieve any medal, but he won the hearts of many, many admirers all over the world. At the end of the race, a reporter asked him, "Why did you do? What did you just do? Why did you do that? You kept running. You were last." And Karu responded very, humbly. He said, "I did not come here to win. I came here to run." And he smiled. So Karu's, this full involvement and persistence motivated the citizens of Japan and the entire world. This was what they needed to rebuild their nation, the boost, the morale boost, the inspiration. He had no hope of winning the event, but he did what he went there to do with 100% attention and full involvement. He represented his country, participated in the event as an honorable athlete, because that's what Olympics is all about. It was Karu's way of life, and he showed it to the world. So newspapers, TV, radio stations in Japan and in many other countries also talked about Karu's humble courage, his humbleness, his courage, and his self-confidence. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, a chapter about him was added to the school textbooks in Japan as a life lesson to the children. So I think it's about time that we also take a lesson from Karu's book. That's it. Thank you for listening. I hope this made sense to you and did not put you to sleep too long. Thank you.